Your colonial media syndicate, yesterday's British Raj, today's Guardian, still churns out anti-Hindu, anti-indigenous propaganda. A campaign that is dripping with the same venom your empire used to justify the massacres. How dare you, who colonized and butchered indigenous Hindus, label us, fellow victims of your empire, as oppressors of other indigenous people like those in Bolivia? If you refuse to retract your defamatory filth, know this, Guardian, we will drag you into the courts, sue you for every penny of your colonial blood money, and bury your lies under the weight of legal justice. Guardian, you, the anti-Hindu racist media mafia, have launched a vicious onslaught of anti-Hindu hate speech dressed up as journalism, crafted by your South American stooge, Tiago Rogero, and we are dismantling it brick by brick. This isn't some honorable pursuit of truth, it is a calculated smear campaign, a grotesque display of genocidal propaganda from the same colonial butchers who bled the indigenous Hindus dry for 200 years under the British tyranny. Now, hiding your gore-stained hands behind a progressive veil, your article is a deliberate assault to obliterate the legitimacy of the indigenous Hindu sovereignty and sabotage our sacred humanitarian bonds with the indigenous people worldwide, including in Bolivia. Let's expose your mouthpiece, Tiago Rogero, your sanctimonious social justice warrior, a left-wing poser who preaches racial equality in Brazil, yet morphs into a snarling colonial enforcer when the Hindus dare to assert their political will. You, genocidal media Guardian, strut as saviors of the oppressed, but the moment indigenous Hindus rise with KAILASA, forging friendly ties with Bolivia's indigenous nations, you slap us with oppressor labels, unveiling the rancid hypocrisy of your progressive posturing. You, the racist colonial mafia Guardian, have one mission, which is to crush the Hindu leadership and erase our sovereign voice, enabling a neo-colonial rerun of your empire's ethnocide against every one of us. Your colonial media syndicate, yesterday's British Raj, today's Guardian, still churns out anti-Hindu, anti-indigenous propaganda, a seamless machine furthering your genocidal legacy. What's more sickening is that your left-wing piety merges with the right-wing disdain to peddle these lies. Why these twisted unity? Because the indigenous Hindu sovereignty is a firebomb that is torching your colonial throne. You shudder at a free Hindu nation slipping your neo-colonial claws, dreading the loss of your narrative's stranglehold. Say Hindu besides sovereign, and you, the imperial lapdogs, pounce with hate speech to bury it. Your surgical targeting of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, dragging him into agreements he's not even a part of, lays bare the anti-Hindu racist news cartel's endgame. Not the truth, but a merciless vendetta to crush the Hindu leadership and halt the resurgence of the indigenous traditions that defy the colonial overlords like you, who orchestrated the Hindu Holocaust and now smear our solidarity as a con. This isn't just an attack. It is your war on the religious liberty and the indigenous dignity, building a narrative to manufacture public consent for the genocide of the indigenous Hindus worldwide, for which you are laying the groundwork with every single word of yours. Guardian, your narrative caves in under its own very contradictions. Your headlines veils magical realism, how a fake nation tried to take over indigenous land in Bolivia. This paradox betrays your intellectual dishonesty. If KAILASA is fictional, how could it take over anything real? If any actual agreements existed, then KAILASA cannot be fake. Your genocidal propaganda machine can't even weave a single consistent lie with a headline, a fitting echo of your empire's bungled plunder. Even more damning, you offhandedly claim that Bolivia expelled 20 foreigners linked to KAILASA for seeking obtained land. A feeble phrase that you have cooked up. Yet, these so-called criminals faced no persecution, no jail, just deportation as you claim to India, to Britain, to the US and China. What legitimate criminal probe ends with suspects waved home without charges, trials, or extradition. This farce disintegrates under scrutiny, which is why you, the corporate colonial media, relentlessly parrot these claims while hiding the outcome. No crime was committed, which is why no one, absolutely no one, was charged. You are not reporting, you are spinning hate speech to fulfill and to fuel ethnocide, a page from your colonial playbook. You go on to say that the United States of Kailasa is not recognized by any country or the UN, the fictional nation, the fake country. Guardian, your branding of Kailasa as a non-existent country or a fictional is a savage attack on the indigenous sovereignty and the self-determination rights, a deliberate erasure of our existence that reeks your colonial arrogance. This isn't mere wordplay, it's your calculated ploy, you fake news machine, to erase the existence of the indigenous Hindu communities worldwide. A neo-colonial repeat of your empire's genocidal purge of the Hindu kingdoms that you looted and razed. By what authority do you, the anti-indigenous colonial mouthpiece Guardian, claim the rights to recognize or de-recognize nations? Even the United Nations, as per its own declaration, lacks the power. It admits members, not validates their existence. Yet you strut as a judge and executioner, a role that your empire relished during its reign of terror. Kailasa meets all the Montevideo Convention criteria: permanent population, defined territory, a government structure, and the capacity to enter into international relations. Criteria your own legal scholars once endorsed when it suited your colonial plunder. Article 3 states, the political existence of the state is independent of the recognition by other states. And the OAS Charter's Article 13 doubles down. Even before being recognized, the state has the right to defend its integrity and independence. Kailasa's juridical statehood is rock solid under international law that is rooted in the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism's unbroken succession and the revival of 21 ancient Hindu sovereign states. Your brainwashed journalist, Rogero, who postures as a leftist hero yet vilifies Hindu agency, shows contempt for indigenous self-determination enshrined in the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous Peoples, a document you champion only if it did not threaten your hegemony. You, the mouthpieces of the colonial deep state, wage this campaign because Kailasa's race threatens your neo-colonial stranglehold, a stranglehold built on the corpses of the indigenous civilization that you annihilated. Your real aim isn't questioning legitimacy, it's blocking Hindus from our rightful place with your genocidal media lies, a sequel to your Hindu Holocaust. How dare you, who enslaved and colonized indigenous Hindus like us, now paint us as an oppressor of the Bolivia's indigenous nations when we are forging alliances that you can't stomach? Your hypocrisy is a festering wound. Rogero's leftist drivel about Brazil's oppressed rings hollow when he is your tool to keep the Hindus subjugated. You go on to say, Nityananda, a self-anointed godman, in 2019 fled India while facing charges of abducting children for his ashram and one of raping a follower. Guardian, your vicious smears against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism expose you as hate speech mongers, waging a systematic campaign of religious persecution against the Hindu leadership and the entire Hindu diaspora. A campaign that is dripping with the same venom your empire used to justify the massacres. Let's burn your false allegations with facts. The SPH is not a fugitive who fled India. He is a persecuted religious leader who has been targeted by lawfare. Your colonial cronies cheered as they did during the Raj. In 2012, the Karnataka High Court declared the arrest of the SPH illegal without jurisdiction, quashing it. Yet, you splash photos of the unlawful arrest to persecute the SPH further and further. A contemptuous spit on the justice that echoes your empire's kangaroo courts. An Ohio federal order from the court further fined a false rape accuser nearly $500,000 for defamation, shattering that lie. The medical reports of the SPH prove that rape claims are impossible. His testosterone levels is 12.5 nanograms per deciliter, which is less than 6% of the normal, a biological fact that you ignored. On February 2nd, 2024, the Gujarat High Court exonerated the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism of the abduction charges, confirming his innocence. Similarly, Interpol rejected any notices against the SPH, against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, recognizing the political witch hunt, and the human rights specialist K.C. Jeffrey Robertson documented your persecution as a global disgrace. You, anti-Hindu deep state media, suppress these exonerations to stoke your genocidal propaganda machine, a machine oiled by the blood of the Hindus your empire spilled. Why do you, corrupt media, peddle lies that the courts rejected? Well, it is to crush the Hindu leadership and block the revival of our traditions, a neo-colonial encore to your slaughter of millions. Rogero's sanctimonious bleating for Brazil's oppressed vanishes here. His leftist mask fails, revealing the same racist colonial mafia guardian that butchered Hindus, now targeting the SPH, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, to keep every one of us shackled. You go on to say that its representatives signed contracts with at least 4 indigenous groups for 1,000-year leases. Contracts were abusive and violated several Bolivian laws. The contracts are a total scam. Guardian, let's be unequivocal here. These agreements were between a US-based Hindu organization and the Bolivian indigenous communities. Conservation partnerships honoring indigenous sovereignty, not land grabs, a term that you sling to echo your empire's land thefts. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is not a signatory in any of this, yet you, corrupt media, misattribute them to attack the Hindu diaspora, twisting our humanitarian intent into a colonial caricature. These agreements include the support for environmental knowledge, humanitarian aid, cultural exchange, and all of these are in complement with the Bolivian Law number 465 and the ILO Convention 169, endorsed by leaders under Bolivia's constitution. Article 30 and 403 guarantees indigenous self-determination and territorial integrity, rights that you defend if they didn't involve Hindus. Your framing as 1,000-year leases stink of your deep-seated colonial mentality, rich from a British rag that pillaged us Hindus for centuries, leaving famine and ruin. Why do you, biased media, deny the indigenous Hindus and their partners the legitimate rights? Because you, the media mafia, insist only on your imperial puppets should engage the indigenous people. Your empires divide and conquer still thrives. Now, dressed in Rogero's progressive garb, you are not journalists, you are racists who are pushing a colonial agenda your ancestors soaked in Hindu blood. Rogero's Social Justice Act collapses. He lost Bolivia's indigenous until they partner with the Hindus. Then it's abusive, proving his leftist piety is a neo-colonial fraud to keep us as your eternal victims. You go on to say that Bolivia had expelled 20 foreigners linked to KAILASA, who were seeking to obtain land in indigenous territories. Guardian, here's the damning truth. If these individuals were guilty of land trafficking, as you allege, why were they deported back to India or Britain or the US or China as you claim, instead of being prosecuted in Bolivia? Real crime means trials, not a ticket home. What investigation ends without charge in trials or extradition? None. Because this was no crime, just a political stunt to bolster your narrative. This proves your criminal tale is a sham. No crime occurred, which is why no one was charged. You, establishment media, conceal this because it guts your hateful takeover lie, a neo-colonial trick your empire used to justify the massacre and land grabs across the entire Hindu kingdoms. Your hypocrisy shines here. When your corporate allies exploit the indigenous lands, you're silent. But when Hindus build bridges with Bolivian indigenous, you scream scam. This isn't about justice. It's about preserving your neo-colonial order where you, only you, dictate the indigenous partnerships, a legacy of your colonial ethnic cleansing now wielded by Rogero's forked tongue. You go on to claim that followers of a fugitive Indian Hindu guru on a mission to establish his own state are popping up across Latin America, signing an agreement with the US city of Newark, which was later scrapped. Guardian, our Hindu organizations are worldwide and they engage globally, not fraud, but solidarity with the indigenous people through aid, cultural exchange, and conservation. Acts that you woke media wouldn't question from the Western groups or the colonial groups, whose colonial plunder you all whitewash and you still do. Your disinformation pipeline calls it fraud with absolutely no evidence, masking your colonial dread of indigenous unity that threatens your narrative monopoly. You, corrupt colonial media, ignore the corporate plunder while attacking Hindu partnerships. Your empire's heirs still shield the elites raping the indigenous lands, a legacy Rogero's justice conveniently sidesteps. Rogero's progressive halo fades. He's fine with indigenous agency until it's Hindu-led. Then it's a scam, a double standard that reeks your neo-colonial playbook. Your concern isn't fraud. It's a colonial attempt to crush the global indigenous solidarity movement that could topple your rotting power structure, built on the bones and flesh of our ancestors that you ground into dust. You go on to claim that a photo of the Bolivian president, Luis Arce, smiling as he receives a book entitled The United States of KAILASA from a woman wearing a saffron-colored sari has begun circulating. Guardian, your snide dig that KAILASA's representatives managed a photo with President Arce is yet another low blow by you, dishonest press, to taint the legitimate diplomacy. Fact, SIDOB invited us to their anniversary, a sanctioned event where we gifted President Arce in goodwill, a gesture of indigenous kinship your empire never understood, preferring bayonets to bridges. No schemes, no violations, just honest, pure engagement. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was not there, yet you, biased media, twist it into deceit, a colonial reflex from your gore-soaked past, now wielded by Rogero's duplicitous pen to smear us. You, misinformation empire, can't stand a Hindu indigenous solidarity defying your script, so you cry foul while ignoring your deep state mouthpieces' selective outrage. Your empire posed with the puppet kings after toppling ours. Now, you scoff at our dignity, a hypocrisy Rogero's progressive lens conveniently blinds him to. You quote Elderber's journalist saying, "When I first read the contracts, I thought I must be imagining this. They were so irrational that it felt like magical realism. KAILASA had manipulated some of its representatives and taken advantage of their vulnerability. It seemed like a monarchy with indigenous subjects." Guardian, you corporate corrupt media, alongside your colonial lapdogs like Elderber, have the audacity to veil scandal over conservation agreements between indigenous groups while turning a blind eye to the real crooks, the mining mafia, the extractive industries, who strong-arm the indigenous people into shady, coercive deals to plunder their lands, a practice your British Empire perfected when it raped our resources for centuries. These same hypocrites stay silent when the real land grabbers exploit resources, stripping forests and rivers bare for profit. But the second indigenous nations like the Bore sign legitimate partnerships with Hindu organizations to protect their territory, your misinformation campaign, misinformation empire, slithers out, shrieking exploitation and deceit. It's a sick double standard. You prop up the deep-pocketed destroyers of indigenous heritage. Your colonial cronies who have fattened themselves on stolen wealth since the Raj, then feign outrage when the conservation deals threaten their blood-soaked profits. Your sanctimonious cries are a farce, a neo-colonial shield for the true pillages you have shielded over generations. Even more galling, Elderber's journalist Silvana Vicente whimpers that these agreements seemed like a monarchy with indigenous subjects. A laughable smear dripping with colonial irony from the press that grovelled at the feet of your British monarchy, which enslaved millions of indigenous peoples, including Hindus, as literal subjects under its crown. How dare you, genocidal media guardian, parrot this drivel when your empire's monarchs ruled with an iron fist, treating indigenous nations as chattel while you looted their gold and burned their histories? These partnerships aren't about subjugation. They are mutual pacts of solidarity, legally valid under the Bolivian law, aimed at conservation and cultural exchange, not domination. Contrast that with your rule, which turned Bharat into a vassal state, its people starved and whipped into submission. That was your monarchy, with indigenous subjects, not Kailasa's noble outreach. You fling this monarchy label to paint Hindus as tyrants, a racist trope your empire honed to justify the massacres, while we are here healing the wounds with the Bolivia's indigenous skin. Even the indigenous leaders quoted admits a legally valid agreement was signed. By his own words, it is aimed to conserve their lands and resources, not peddle fake promises. Yet you, the dishonest press, twist this into a con, ignoring the noble intent and the legal standing confirmed by the signees themselves. Agreements rooted in respect, not exploitation, unlike your empire's treaties that promise protection while delivering chains. The indigenous leaders are being strong-armed and brainwashed by the true culprits, the mining mafias and their deep state mouthpieces such as you, who now masquerade as protectors, pressurizing them to ditch these partnerships by convincing them they are dupes. You, biased media, aren't exposing a scandal, you're running a cover for the real exploiters. Your colonial allies who have raped the indigenous lands for profit since your first ship docked there. This isn't journalism. It's your genocidal propaganda machine churning out lies to sabotage indigenous sovereignty and solidarity. A desperate bid to keep Hindus and our allies crushed under your neo-colonial heel. You go on to say that the Guardian sent a list of questions to Kailasa's office but has not received a response. Guardian, your claim is an absolute falsehood, a bald-faced lie proving your clear malice in publishing this fake defamatory article. Kailasa never received any questions from you. Never. You genocidal media Guardian, we have never received anything from you. Not a single email, not a letter or a call. Nothing landed in our hands. This is entirely fabricated. This fabricated excuse is your flimsy shield to dodge accountability for your premeditated smear campaign, a coward's move from an outlet that claims transparency while cloaking in its own deceit. You didn't seek out our voices because your agenda isn't the truth. It's crafting a narrative to justify the Hindu ethnocide and genocide, a tactic that your empire perfected when it silenced our pleas with bullets. How dare you feign due diligence while plotting our erasure? This lie alone proves your intent to build a case for genocide without even pretending to hear us. A colonial arrogance your Raj wielded to bury our cries under mass graves. Guardian, your relentless campaign against Kailasa and the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism unmasks you as the hate speech mongers perpetuating colonial narratives to dominate the indigenous communities. Your 200-year Hindu Holocaust, millions starved and slaughtered, now seeps from your ink. Every article branding Kailasa as fictional, every lie targeting our collaboration serves your genocidal purpose, reinforcing the neo-colonial power that exploits the indigenous resources, enabling the ethnic cleansing that you pioneered. This is not journalism. It's your media-fueled colonization, laying the groundwork for Hindu genocide with surgical precision. How dare you, who colonized and butchered indigenous Hindus, label us, fellow victims of your empire, as oppressors of other indigenous people like those in Bolivia? When we are forging bonds of solidarity, your blood-soaked hands can't grasp. Your strategy is your empire spectre. Demonize the indigenous leaders defying your interests, delegitimize their institutions, and manufacture public consent for persecution. Tactics that fueled your Hindu massacres, now masked as investigative journalism. Rogero's leftist facade, cheering Brazil's oppressed while savaging Hindu agency, proves your racist colonial hypocrisy. You adore indigenous voices until they align with Hindus, shattering your hegemony. Then it's war. We demand that you halt this racist prejudice campaign, recommit to ethical journalism, and issue an unambiguous apology for inciting genocidal hate against Hindus, against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism and Kailasa. Your neo-colonial tyranny ends here, exposed and crumbling. And yet, if you refuse to retract your defamatory filth, know this, Guardian, we will drag you into the courts, sue you for every penny of your colonial blood money, and bury your lies under the weight of legal justice. Your reckoning is coming, and we'll make sure that it stings.